Wireless microphone or this? Test 1, 2, 3. How's it working there?
There it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So now we can get started. So sorry for that little technical glitch. Again, it's good to get started back. I will tell you, and I told this to Ben and some other people, I said, for whatever reason, this has kind of been a difficult series of lessons to put together. One of us because we've been off. I haven't taught in a while. Big thanks to Jesse for teaching last week. He did a fantastic job on Boethius. If you didn't get to hear that, you should go back and listen to it and figure out a guy that has a lot of impact on our lives that today nobody has ever heard of for whatever reason. And so just want to continue on in that kind of sense. And so tonight we're going to actually get into the medieval ages, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So first thing is to make sure this is working. Here we go. As our word is a bull, and that's from the medieval Latin bulla, which means to seal. And you will hear a thing called a papal bull, which means they have sealed a message. And so that's what you'll hear that. And so sometimes you'll hear this papal bull or that papal bull. I don't think we're actually going to refer to it tonight, but that's something on that. And then we have the usual things. If you need to get a hold of me, here's the information for my email and my telephone number. If you're live, send a message over to Jesse. If you have questions or comments or say backup or, I got something stuck in my teeth, whatever it is, do that. If you're recorded, email a comment to me, put a comment in the Church Center app. I said I was going to quit checking YouTube messages, and then my youngest son said, well, I'm going to keep putting messages on YouTube. So I guess I got to do those anyway. And then we'll also put some things on our Church Center app. And tonight in particular is one link that I'm going to put on there to a podcast that I've listened to that I think you'll get on that. I am still taking requests for topics. And so as we move into the medieval ages, and I've already had a couple of things that people have asked about it. And we're not going to talk about any of those tonight because one of them is, and some of these, by the way, still are topics today, not just from this time period. But as we go into these things, you'll look at it and you'll go like, yeah, well, we still have that. So I'm still taking requests for topics on that. So as you start thinking about why does the church do this or not do this or whatever it is, there's usually a good reason, and it's usually found in some church history time period that they will have issues that have happened. And so continue to send me in some things like that because I think it helps for me to know how you do it. And Steve said he didn't want to flunk, so he's going to think of a topic. He hasn't gotten there yet, but he's still on for that. So just encourage you to send in topics. Heard on the street, and this is a question. I really didn't hear anything on the street this time. Some of it's because I was on drugs and out of commission and everything else. But I did ask the question. I said, when asked, what do you think of when the Middle Ages is mentioned, what do you say? And I asked that to several people, mainly family. Adriana, who's a visitor of ours, said, the medieval times placed over on Dallas on Stemmons Freeway. Anybody been there? That could be what you think about when you think of Middle Ages. My daughter-in-law, Dr. Phoebe, said, the time between being young and old. That's what's Middle Ages, so I thought, well, okay, she put it in the medical context. Jesse said, Arthur, King of the Britons. He went right to Monty Python, which you get into this right here. So I'm sorry, but I trained him up on that. So Ben said Knights and Crusades. That's pretty boring, Ben, but it works. That's what you think of. And then Kathy said, how did civilization going from flushing sewage systems, in particular in Ephesus is what we're thinking of, to throwing waste out the window onto the street? And that does happen. It did happen. And it's just something that depends on the city and such. But when we were in Ephesus, one of the places you go to there is the public toilet. And they have, 20 or 30 stalls, not even that, holes set up. And they had water running underneath these things. And so you go in there and go take care of your business, flushes it out to the ocean. And that was kind of it. How do we go from that to nothing on that? And that's what happens in the Middle Ages. And some of that has to do with location and time and stuff on that. So what's on the docket for tonight? I'm going to do a Middle Ages overview. So buckle up because this is going to go fast. And then we're going to talk about the roots of orthodoxy or how to be orthodox or something like that. And I get to wear my shirt, my sweatshirt for the first time tonight, which is orthodoxy or death. And you will maybe understand that by the time we get through with this. And then we're going to run into a thing called the iconoclasm controversy that happened during this period of time that we're kind of hitting on tonight. So first, let's get some words. Latin Logan, he's not in here tonight. Where are the boys anyway? They're out back. Okay. Words of the day. Medieval. That's one of the things you'll hear about it. Middle Ages, medieval. That's from the Latin medium, meaning middle, and avium, meaning age. So thus you get middle age. So if you say medieval, all you're saying is a Latin word for middle age. So if I say, Jesse, I see you're getting to be medieval. That's right. He's middle-aged. I remember the first time a doctor told me I was middle-aged. I said, what? He didn't call me medieval either, by the way. A saint is another Latin word from the word sanctos, and that means holy. So if you call someone a saint, so Saint Ben, we can't do that because he put me in cowboy gear. All right. Anyway, if you call somebody a saint, that means that they're a holy person. All right. Providence, our kids go to Providence, and Logan goes to Providence Academy, and that's from the Latin providentia, meaning foresight or divine guidance, and you'll see how that works out. And Ben even brought that up today about the providence of God, and so we'll get to see about that. So let's look at the medieval ages. So we're going to talk about the time period, some notable people, developments that happened during this time period, cultural growth, and the church in this time period. And like I say, buckle up because we're going to do this. So when were the Middle Ages? So first of all, there's a period of time called late antiquity that happened from around 250, and none of these have a solid start and end date. All right, it ended, late antiquity ended around 750. Some people will say that when the fall of Rome happened, that was the absolute end. And so you see that late antiquity kind of peaking right there at 476, which was the fall of Rome, and then it's going to drop down. So you get that period of AD 250 to 750. Middle Ages, a lot of times people say it begins at the fall of Rome. And in my opinion, it was ushered in by the worst time to be alive. And if you guys sat through a couple of episodes ago when we talked about Islam, there were several things that happened. There was a global winter that happened because of volcanoes that erupted. One in San Salvador in particular was the one that they believe erupted, and it caused global winter for a couple of years. So global winter, no food, things won't grow. And then that's followed by a plague. So there's famine, by the way, after that, followed by a plague. And that was the first time the Black Death, but they called it the Justinian plague then, but it was the same thing that's going to happen in the late Middle Ages. All right. And then there was the last great war of antiquity, which we don't think anybody thinks of. This was the Constantinople and what is modern day Turkey and the Byzantium Empire that sometimes you hear called. It was the Eastern Roman Empire, and they were doing battle with the Persian Empire, which also, you see biblical references to that. So Babylon, the Babylonians, and all that period of that, and those two were constantly at each other in that Eastern European time. And there went on a war that lasted for a number of years, which each side, I think, I went back and looked at the notes, each side lost about 250,000 soldiers over that period of time. At the end of that, they were sick of fighting. They just kind of both quit and left and went home. And then you had because of that, by the way, that weakened the Sassanid Empire, and that's what had been the Persian, that weakened them so much that the Arabs were able to just kind of waltz in and take things real easily. And so they became the rulers, started imposing their religion, which we know as Islam today. And so that was, all that time is ushering in these Middle Ages, if you will. And it's going to end around the 16th century. And so you'll get a picture that looks like this, that the Medieval Ages just grows and kind of goes out through there. And the reason to say the 16th century, well, that's when certain historians in that time period started talking about the rebirth. And you would know that as a French term, or the Renaissance, right? And so that's kind of the time period we're talking about, is between 500 or so to the Renaissance. That's a period of time of about 1,000 years. So everybody ready? We're going to cover it all here in the next 10 minutes. All right. Some notable secular events, and I really am going to go through these fast, and hopefully these will just trigger things for you. If you want, stop me and I will say, yeah, I can talk a little bit more about that. If you don't, just bear with it and ask me later. And here you see the picture of the knights and these guys fighting and flags and castles and everything else, right? So some of these things here is, let's go here. Fall of Rome, 476. The Justinian Code, which was in the early 6th century. And that set, basically, they reset all the legal laws. That's going to last throughout all of Europe, probably until late Middle Ages. So for the next 1,000 years, the Justinian Code is going to be how things are adjudicated legally. The emperor unified under Justinian, and so while it had split between East and West, Justinian and his brilliant general Belisarius came in and they basically retook Italy and kicked the Goths out and then he went on over to fight the Sassanids and such like that. But so you had this partial reunification of the empire under Justinian. Within 2 generations, it's all gone. All right, you'll still have the Eastern Roman Empire, but that happened during that time. You had the siege of Constantinople, and it was a failed siege. And this is when an Arab, what do you call him, a caliph, came in, and he wanted, and I mean the Arabs have been growing and taking everything. Well, they come up to Constantinople and they want it. It is the jewel of the Roman Empire. It is wealthy, and let's pluck that plum off, right? They come up, can't do it. Why? Justinian, or the Theodosian walls and Greek fire is another thing that's called. They invent this weapon that they're actually able to go out and torch their ships. And so this fleet of about 1,000 Muslim ships are coming to, and they had siege on Rome for about a year. And so they come in and they're getting reinforcements. Well, as things are going on, there's lots of different issues that are happening. And so Leo sends out his fleet, and they actually fire. If anybody saw Game of Thrones and you saw the fire that they used on that, that's where they stole that from, all right? And so they actually go in and they torch these ships, just completely destroy their fleet, and that sends the Muslims home, and they're going to stay that way for another 700-800 years before they try to do this again. So the next thing that happens is the German tribes. And remember, we talked about all these German tribes that were in the north part of Europe. They're taking over the southern part of Europe, and they become nations. And so you're going to get the countries of Germany, France, Spain eventually, Italy, and those are what's going to come out of this during this time period as they become nations. Also feudalism, and nobody mentioned this, but in their society they had lords and kings and nobles and barons and knights and pawns. No, they didn't have pawns. They had bishops, but you get the idea. What's on a chessboard, that's where this comes out of. Is you look at what's on a chessboard, and that's exactly what. And there was also a huge merchant class that came on this, and then there were peasants, which were usually all the farmers and we call blue collar labor, and you have that in there as well. Or they call them serfs as well. So that's coming out in the social structure. Also in this time period, in 793, you have those guys with the horns on their helmet, right? Vikings, and they raid Lindisfarne, and they're going to continue to raid these things. And they're a bunch of heathens, they're pagans, they don't believe in anything Christian at all. And Lindisfarne was a monastery, and that was one of the first things in, and that was easy pickings for them. And so they kept coming back and wanting more and more of that. Charlemagne is the Holy Roman Emperor. We're going to talk about him next week, kind of get into some detail about how he plays in and how it is. And if you look at that, part of his thing was to establish the Holy Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire is gone. So now we're going to make it holy, which implies church and state are melded together. I put this in just for Ben. This is when Cairo got started. So Ben goes like, yeah, I knew it was a bad period of time. Ben had talked about that. He does never want to go back to Cairo. And so there's Cairo for you. The Norman Conquest, this is a time period for William the Conqueror. Hopefully you remember that from something. And he's basically in Normandy, which is northern France, which we also think about the beaches of Normandy. And he goes in and takes over the United Kingdom or Great Brittany. And so that they settle that, and that becomes what we know as Great Britain today. And that's all settled by William the Conqueror. The Magna Carta was signed in 1215. That basically pulled in some of the rights of kings and such like that. The Siege of Acre, 1219. This is when the Holy Lands, they had taken the Holy Lands back. This is when the Holy Lands were lost to the Muslims pretty much for good until some things happened more in our 20th century. 1337 begins the 100 Years' War. And this is a period of time, and it wasn't like they were at war all 100 years, but it was a period of time that basically France and Great Britain were at war continually. It never ended. And it just was a drain, and just went on and on and on. 1347 through 1351, the Black Death, and there's all sorts of things where they be board games or anything else that you see, things like that. And it just amazes me. If you just go and type in the Black Death, you're going to get all sorts of stuff. Some of it's historical and some of it is not. And I made Jonah listen to a thing on the Black Death once, and he didn't ride with me anymore. So in 1453, the Ottoman siege of Constantinople, that was Suleiman the Magnificent. So you have all these guys that are, Leo the Great and Constantine the Great, Alexander the Great. Well, this is Suleiman the Magnificent. And so he's going to be better than great. He's magnificent. And then 1469, the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella create the country of Spain. And Columbus sails to India. Didn't get there, unless you call the West Indies India, but that's what happened. So all that's in this time period. Pretty interesting stuff that goes on. Lots to cover. The culture in that thing, this was when the year Anno Domini was first used. Now, I know there's efforts today to change that over to Common Era. Isn't that what they call it? CE? Common Era. I absolutely refuse to do that. It's the year of our Lord. Anno Domini is what that means. That was first coined in 1525, and they changed the calendars over to be a Christian calendar as opposed to a Roman calendar or a Julian. We're on the Julian calendar. It was somebody help me out, Roman calendar. All right, this is the time of universities and scholasticism. Jesse talked about Boethius and the influence he had. And by the way, universities and scholasticism were Christian. That's what it was about. You went to learn about Christian things. You didn't go to learn math or science or anything else. You went to learn how that interplayed with Christianity. Big change from what we have today. You have architectural advancements during this time period. Gothic cathedrals, basilicas. The first one was the Basilica of St. Denis, and that's actually been there. Stepped inside the doors and then went back outside to little Algeria. I mean, it was in Paris, and that's where all the old kings and stuff like that are entombed. In 1401, the Florence baptistry doors were made, and that was the beginning. Some people say that was the beginning of the Renaissance era, and so you're going to see a huge change in art that's going to happen when the Renaissance happens. It was rich literature time too, and I want to emphasize how Christian this age was. There's prose legends, epic poems, histories, theology, and they embodied Christian culture. And so in the 5th century, there was Prudentius that had a book or writing called Psychomachia. And I just looked at that and I said, man, that sounds like a heavy metal CD. And so I talked to Jesse about it. I said, oh yeah, Battle of the Souls. And that's what Psychomachia meant. And that's what it was about. It was about battle of the souls. Boethius that Jesse talked about last week, and Beowulf, which was I had to read this like when I was in, I don't know, high school or something. Anybody read Beowulf? I loved it. It was the stuff that boys are good at, right? Let me give you an example. The Almighty Judge of good deeds and bad, the Lord God, head of the heavens and high King of the world, was unknown to them. Oh, cursed is he who in time of trouble had to thrust his soul into the fire's embrace, forfeiting help. He had nowhere to turn. But blessed is he who after death can approach the Lord and find friendship in the Father's embrace. Now that's in Beowulf, and it's a battle book, that kids would love. At least I loved it. I just remember taking that, and I was weird like that. So that's just an example, though, of how literature was about Christian things, and so that's a highlight to me about that. The culture there was, again, we talked about these things. They had travel literature like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, Dante's Divine Comedy, which here we'll talk more about that in a future lecture. Thomas Malory, La Morte d'Arthur, King Arthur. All right, that's what it is, the death of Arthur, basically. So this is about King Arthur, and that's when that legend began. And then he had a guy named Leonardo Fibonacci. Anybody heard that name? All right, okay, good. If you ever heard of Fibonacci, it's one of those ones that I had to ask Kathy about at one time, and she was a math teacher, but he wrote a book called Liber Abaci, if I get that right, which means the book of calculation. He introduced basically Hindu Arabic numbers to us. So all the numbers that we use today, one, the little one and stuff like that, he was the one that introduced that. And so that happened in 1202, which you look at that and go like, that's 800 years ago. I thought those were around forever, but no, it was during the Middle Ages, or some people say the Dark Ages. Well, maybe they weren't so dark. He also, in this book, introduced the concept of zero. You don't have zero in Roman numerals. Think about that for a second. You don't. You get to 10, it's an X, right? Think about Super Bowls. You got to think about Super Bowls, because that's the only time we ever use Roman numerals or on clocks. But he introduced that, and anyway, so there's all sorts of things. There's I could go on about this guy, and just a pretty amazing guy on this thing. And then 1439, Johannes Gutenberg invents the printing press, which really isn't true. The Chinese had invented it before him, but he introduced it to Europe. He invented it for Europe. And so let's look at the church in the Middle Ages. And man, we are cruising, not fast enough. And you're going to see a melding of church and state. This is or marriage. I mean, you cannot separate church and state during this period of time. All right, so let's just start there. The church had strict control over your spiritual life. They told you what to do, and that's what it's going to get to. All right. The church owned education, monasteries, the clerical functions, they owned all of it. There was not a school during this time period that didn't focus on that. The last one was the School of Athens, and basically during the Middle Ages, it got shut down, was the Athens School of Philosophy, or whatever they called it. The temporal authority was in the East, and so the Eastern Roman Empire were the ones that maintained that temporal authority. And what I mean by that is they're the ones that carried the swords and went to war and everything like that. And they controlled the church. And so the emperor would appoint the bishops or the patriarchs or whatever. And if he didn't like a guy, you're out. And so who controlled the church was the emperor. All right. And that's in the West, the East. But in the West, the secular authority in the West was the church, or it's going to develop into being the church. And you're going to see places where they're going to have the papal states, which are in southern Italy, that they're going to rule. And they actually, everything went through there. So taxes are collected by the church and everything else that you can imagine on that. And the Holy Roman Empire too. That's the same thing as the church basically felt it could put kings or emperors in place. You didn't become Holy Roman Emperor without the Pope's blessing. And so you're going to see that happen in this time. you have the hierarchical development in the church. And so this is where you're going to get pope, cardinals, archbishops, the holy orders of bishop, priest, deacon. That didn't happen until really around the 9th century. And you can go with others that are included, abbots and friars and monks, and all that is included. It gets to be kind of a labyrinth that you sometimes can't look at. You figure out what's going on. The church had incredible wealth, and the state actually collected the church tithes. So can you imagine that in the United States now? The state's going to collect church, or the government's going to, the IRS is going to collect your tithes, and then they'll give it to the various churches as they do it. How messed up is that? Anyway, the monasteries, all right, became prosperity centers, all right? They had no taxes, and they didn't have to pay any wages. All the monks worked for free. And so they became these huge commercial enterprises. And you're going to see from monasteries, they're going to have vineyards, beer, they have, you wrinkled your nose up with that one. They're going to have, everything you can imagine from a commerce standpoint. And guess what? They have it down without any overhead. And so they become incredibly wealthy, started owning huge amounts of land and everything else. And what does wealth bring? Corruption. And so now you're going to get things like simony, which basically is the selling of offices. And I mentioned these guys tonight. I think next week or 2 weeks, we'll talk about some of the corruption in the church. And I told Ben, I said that one of the tough things about this time period is there's not a lot of good things happening with the church. It all seems to go bad to worse, to worse, to worse, which will lead us to 1517, and that's when Luther nails it, all right? And so we're headed that direction, but kind of like you got to get really bad before you can get there. Indulgences, well, I think people are familiar with the selling of indulgences and some other things. This is also time that pilgrimages happen. So one of the big ones is the Santiago de Compostela, and that's still a huge pilgrimage. And Kathy and I watched a video on this thing, and we actually have a friend that did this pilgrimage. And it's basically you take a pilgrimage from places like Paris or Europe, someplace, and you walk all the way across to basically the northern end of Spain. And supposedly there were some relics there that you walk to, and then you can pray to the relics and that. So huge pilgrimage deal. I don't think I'm going to do it. In 606, the Emperor Phocas, who's in Constantinople, he's the Roman emperor, he declares the Roman bishop the head of the church. And what did he get for that? Well, the head of the church there basically said, oh yeah, I'm making you emperor and you make me the head guy over here and things will be good. Well, that was really the first time that the emperor ever declared the Pope as head of the entire church, which meant east, west, every place else. And they're never going to put that genie back in the bottle either. In 726 through 842, you have the iconoclasm controversy. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The Great Schism happened between the East and West churches over communion. Crazy things. Still to this day, the East and West don't necessarily fellowship with one another, even though I thought there was something that happened after the death of John Paul II that they wanted to try to heal some of the schism, but it's not going to really happen. 1095 is when the First Crusade, and that's fascinating how that all happens. And that's going to go on. There ended up being over 20 different crusades, and not all of them were aimed at the Holy Land either. There were some of them that were against other Christians. So 1309, that's when the papacy moves from Rome to Avignon, and that's in France. Kathy I got to go there. We went to the Palace of the Pope, and it was incredibly disappointing. So that's all I'll say about that. In 1215 was the Fourth Lateran Council, and Lateran Palace is in Rome still today. And in the Fourth Lateran Council, that's when the Pope, when they proclaim the Pope as infallible, when he speaks ex cathedra. And his chair, ex cathedra, means is out of the chair of St. Peter. And so when he speaks out of the chair of St. Peter, he's infallible. All right. Just stuff that happens. Some notable church people, Pseudo-Dionysius, the Areopagite, and we're going to have to talk about him next week a little bit. He basically writes a bunch of stuff that's false that became fact, if you will. In other words, if you say something long enough, like the Pope is infallible, the Pope is infallible, pretty soon everybody goes, well, I guess the Pope is infallible. Just like other things that are happening, like, oh, the man-made global warming. Folks, we've had global climate change throughout the history of the earth, all right? So, you know, to blame it on fossil fuels or whatever is kind of a little bit crazy. Anyway, 529, Benedict of Nursia, that he creates the Benedictine order. We've talked about him before. Gregory the Great, we've talked about. The Venerable Bede, and he writes a book called The Ecclesiastical History of the English People. I still don't think I said that right. And we have so much information because of him, and he is an important character. You don't have a lot of historians that didn't have an agenda during this time. So you got to really be careful with some of the things they say. Francis of Assisi, or Saint Francis of Assisi, they're in the 1181, 1226. Interesting guy. I don't know that we're going to get into him. Pope Gregory the Seventh, and this is when they had a big investiture controversy, basically selling the office of the Pope. And he gets involved in that. And then Pope Innocent III, and I talked to Jonah, and he was the most influential Pope of the Middle Ages, and we will talk about him more. I call him Pope Not So Innocent III, and you'll run into some things on that. And then a guy named Thomas Aquinas. I didn't spell that right. He didn't have a C in there. And he wrote Summa Theologica, which is a huge volume of everything that you wanted to know about theology. He summed it all up, and is still referred to today by lots and lots of people. And the guy was brilliant, and some of that. Some of the medieval church doctrine developments, orthodoxy. We'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. Iconography. All right, and that is basically, we'll get to that. All right, the veneration of relics. All right, anybody know about the veneration of relics? It's weird stuff there. Purgatory, we're not going to talk about tonight. Papal authority and communion, transubstantiation. So those are some doctrinal developments that we will try to run through. All right, when Kathy and I went to Cambodia this last fall, some interesting things, and I'm going to do this. When you drive through, and we were just in one area, these little things like this were in everybody's yard and businesses. You couldn't go without these. And then they had places of business that would have hundreds of these things all lined up there. And we asked our tour guide, what's this about? What's that?
Fancy birdhouse.
It's a fancy birdhouse, but it's also a shrine to Buddha. All right. And when you go to see a Buddha shrine, this is just one of millions probably. And you can see the little offering trays down there, and the incense burners, and Buddha up here and under the umbrella. And this was one in one place. And then you see people, and this was at the foot of the sleeping Buddha. And this lady's down here in earnest praying to Buddha and giving the offering. And people leave bottles of water and flowers and all sorts of stuff at these things. And these statues are just rocks that have been carved. All right. This was on the steps to a Buddhist temple, as you can see back up there. And I don't know if you can see right there in the center of this thing is a big sphinx, golden sphinx, and probably gold painted. Anyway, it runs back through there, and there's another one on the right side. And then down this right side, these are people begging. And I remember as we're walking through in broken English, I am blind. And they're just begging for money, and our tour guide wouldn't let us do anything. And your heart goes out to them, but they're at the foot of the temple begging for healing. And then you go on through and you see these kind of roads. We didn't necessarily see this one. I pulled this one off of the internet, but you would see these just roads of these statues leading up to these temples. And I asked Kathy the question, if you could outlaw and destroy all the temples and shrines in Cambodia, would you? Because folks, I'll tell you, it was disturbing to see that kind of thing. And I've asked that question, and you can answer. You can speak back now. And I'm getting radio silence, and people look like they get like deer caught in the headlights. Do I need to?
You outlaw, people would still, if they're coming from a background of that, they would still follow. I mean, so you're not really outlawing. I mean, you can get rid of them, but doesn't mean they're not going to try to still
Right.
practice that.
Yeah.
But if you could destroy and overwhelm them with teachings of Christianity and Christ, then I would say, yeah, do it.
Okay, so Ben is in the camp of let's get rid of all the pagan stuff. All right. I mean, he's saying get rid of all the idols, the statues, and everything else, and then teach them about Christ. All right. Some of you may be in the same camp. It's a question that I'm glad I don't have to answer. All right. But it is a very interesting question that you can struggle with it because you go like, how do you do that? How do you take a country like Cambodia, which is a third world country, but yet it is filled with paganism and around Buddha? The same situation was in the Roman Empire. Instead of Buddha, it was Apollo or Zeus or whatever. I was talking with our visitors here the other day, and I said, do you know about some of these Greek and Roman gods? And they said, yeah, because we've read or watched Percy Jackson and the Olympians. All right. And a lot of people, that's where they get their idea of what paganism is. And it always struck me as I went through, she's all right. It struck me as we went through Greece or Rome or Italy or any of those places, you have these huge, huge temples to Apollo or whatever it may be. And I always said, these were not myths. We put them, if you go to the library tomorrow and say, I want to look up stuff on Greek mythology, I bet you most of the books, and maybe all of the books that they're going to have at the library are going to be in the children's section. We treat them as cute little stories. And yet, just like these, they were pervasive throughout society, through the Roman society. There were easily well over 1,000 different gods that they worshiped. And so now you have a Christian culture coming in, but it's even at the early Middle Ages, by and large, it's not a Christian empire. So let's change that. We're going to put Ben in charge, and we're going to change it. So Augustine wrote this, and he said, and this is in The City of God, it said, he's referring to a guy, Scipio Narcia, you'll forget about him, did not understand that these pagan gods were actually pernicious demons. For the divine teaching which purifies the heart by faith had not yet been revealed to the peoples. The teaching which moves human affections and humble piety to the pursuit of heavenly, even more than heavenly things, and frees them from the domination of prideful demons. I have taken it upon myself the task of defending the glorious city of God against those who prefer their own gods to the founder of that city. And that's from The City of God. And so you see Augustine laying it down. All right. These pagan gods are actually pernicious demons. That thought is going to carry over, all right, throughout the empire amongst the leaders and the thought leaders and the people that are ruling. This right here is a place called Delphi. It's in Greece. Kathy and I were visiting Athens, and I saw a tour that said you can go to Delphi. And I told Kathy, let's go do this, not knowing that it was about a 2-hour bus ride to get there. But you go up there, and this at one point in time, and people have heard of the Oracle of Delphi. This was it. This was the stadium. This was looking down on part of their temple complex there. And the Oracle of Delphi was where you would go to get your future told. And it didn't matter if you were a king or just a worker bee, you would go up to Delphi and have these priestesses prophesy about your future. And they would always give answers in very cryptic message. So if you wanted to say, am I going to have a boy or a girl? And they would say, boy, not girl. And depending on where you put the comma, that meant you're having a boy, not a girl, or you're boy not, you're having a girl. Or a king asked, yeah, really, really good stuff. And the king asked, if I lead my army to fight this other army, will I win? He said, if your army crosses this river, or it says, yeah, if you cross this river, a great army will be destroyed. Well, the king interpreted that to be that he was going to equip the other guys. He crossed, lost. His was the great army that got destroyed. And so it was always cryptic like that, what they do. And then they probably gave others too, that, but people would actually take a week off of vacation, go to Delphi, go to consult the oracle, give their gifts at the altar of that, and it became a very wealthy thing. They had a hippodrome where they would have chariot races and sword fights and everything else you can imagine that you think of this stuff. And so that's just a sign of what went on. And if you ever get to go to this, I'd say go to it. It's really a clip. So step one, though, get rid of paganism. All right, this is going to end Greco-Roman pace. So 382, the Emperor Gratian, on advice of Ambrose of Milan, remember him? He ends the public financial support for pagan priests and Vestal virgins. They were getting their money from the state. And he says, we're done with that. I'm a Christian emperor. No more of this. He ordered that the altar of victory be removed from Rome. A lot of Roman historians will say that's when Rome, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, Edward Gibbons, that's when it started. When they moved that altar of victory, they lost. And so that's what you're telling that. Well, Theodosius II made paganism absolutely illegal. We'll see about that. 393, the Olympic Games were canceled because they were a pagan festival. Didn't get reinstituted until, I don't know, when were they? 1900s? Yeah. Yeah, 1902, so 1900s. But that's why they were canceled, because they were a pagan festival. Didn't fit in with Ben's Christian principles. I'm going to pick on you the rest of the night, Ben. The Oracle of Delphi, shut it down. Kathy said, good riddance, because those guys were a bunch of shysters. Step number 2, embrace the name. So this is from the Theodosian Code, 391. And this is the emperor. It is our will that all peoples ruled by the administration of our clemency shall practice that religion which the divine Peter, the apostle, transmitted to the Romans. We command that persons who follow this rule shall embrace the name of Catholic Christians. Now, who does that have? Who did it say is going to do this? It is our will that all people ruled by our administration, all the Roman Empire, need to be called Catholic Christians. All right, let's keep on. Let's enforce that with the avenging sword. This is Theodosian Code as well. It is decreed that in all places the temples should be closed at once, and after a general warning, the opportunity of sinning be taken away from the wicked. We decree also that the populace shall cease from making sacrifices. And if anyone has committed such a crime, let him be stricken with the avenging sword. And we decree that the property of the one executed shall be claimed by the city, and that rulers of the provinces shall be punished in the same way if they neglect to punish such crimes. So not only will we put you to the sword, if you're a ruler and you're not enforcing this, you're in the same boat. Now this is Christianity unveiled. Not feeling too good about Christianity this time, are you? All right. This is Ben's version of orthodoxy. I know Ben would never do this. All right, let's deal with heresies. The rest, however, whom we judge demented and insane shall carry the infamy of heretical dogma. Not orthodoxy, heresy. Their meeting places shall not receive the name churches, and they shall be smitten first by divine vengeance, and secondly by the retribution of hostility, which we shall assume in accordance with the divine judgment. That's law now. Opponently line, straighten it up, or else you're getting the same thing as the pagans. All right, how about the plan of salvation? All right. All those who have not become baptized must come forward. All right, so if you're not a Christian, come forward, whether they reside in the capital or in the provinces, and go to the very holy Catholic, holy churches. So come forward, go to church, and with their wives, their children, their households, to be instructed in the true faith of Christianity. I love that when they put true faith in there. And once thus instructed, having sincerely renounced your former error, confession of sin, basically, let them be judged worthy of redemptive baptism. There's your 5-step plan of salvation. Should they disobey, let them know that they will be excluded from the state and will no longer have any rights of possession, neither goods nor property, stripped of everything. They will be reduced to penury without prejudice, I probably didn't say that right, to the appropriate punishments that will be imposed upon them. That was Justinian in the 6th century. Yes, Steve?
Did you not just a few slides earlier talk about the churches being closed?
Let me back.
I'm a bit confused.
Uh,
Plan of salvation,
The temples.
pagan temples were being closed.
Yes.
Not churches.
Not churches.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's
The one after.
this one.
Okay, temple.
Yeah, in all places, temples should be closed at once. When they did this, they unleashed some things that were not good, basically, and we'll even talk a little bit more and see some of what goes on there. So there's your plan of salvation. Now, step 6, let's grant the church the temporal power. Now, that's going to come soon to a neighborhood near you. We're not going to talk about that tonight because that is the power of the Roman Catholic Church. And you're going to see it come in full force, and there'll be examples that we'll do. But they're building upon this law that these guys put into place. All right. Now, I know today there are people in Africa that are under the sword of Islam. Christianity's got blood on its hands too. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong. And I'm not saying the church has this, but the institutional imperial church definitely did. And it comes back to that question, if you could take all that stuff out of Cambodia, would you? I'm glad I don't have to answer that question because it could get ugly depending on who it is. And Ben, as a benevolent dictator, would do it just right, but it's a guy after Ben that I'm worried about. All right. And so you'll see kind of.
Look at the things that you're talking about what the church did, forcing all these people to do this. That Egypt, one of the things we learned over there was if you are a Christian, you have to designate Christian or Muslim on your driver's license. If you are a Christian, you can convert to Muslim and change your license. If you are a Muslim, you cannot convert to Christian.
Right.
They will not allow it.
It's
And so
death penalty if you convert from
Exactly.
Islam to.
So,
And
I mean, you see that.
Yeah.
Who knows that they learned that from this behavior.
Yeah.
When they saw what they did here, so I don't know.
Yeah. When you get into some things like this is why I really appreciate the separation of church and state. All right. We still need the state. We need the church more, but we still need the state. So it gets to be very interesting. So this guy, Giovanni de Musi, in the Chronicle of Piacenza, he says this: it is now more than 1,000 years since these territories and cities have been given to the priests. And ever since then, the most violent wars have been waged on their account. Yet the priests neither now possess them in peace, nor will ever be able to possess them. It were in truth better before the eyes of God and the world that these pastors should entirely renounce the dominion temporal. For since Sylvester's time, one of the first popes, the consequences of temporal power have been innumerable wars and the overthrow of peoples and cities. How is it possible that there has never been any good pope to remedy such evils, and that so many wars have been waged for these transient possessions? Truly, we cannot serve God and mammon at the same time, cannot stand with one foot in heaven and the other on earth. So this guy's well before Martin Luther, but he's going like, this is messed up. Is basically what it says. And if you're Catholic, you have to look at this and say, this is something that the Roman Catholic Church owns, that this is. So we'll move along with this. So next, did you see things like this? Clavis Regni Catholicum Vel Mors, which means keys to the Catholic kingdom or death of the soul. Okay, any doubts? Any questions? Orthodoxy? Everybody's on board? All right. Let's talk about iconoclasm in these last 8 minutes. Iconoclasm means breaking of images. And you can see a picture up here where the faces of these, whatever was up there, got chopped off. And I've shown lots and lots of art stuff that has people on it. These are the ones that got whacked off. You have to think about the medieval mindset at this time, okay? And this is going to be in the year, it's going to be in the 8th century, all right? And there's 2 questions. Does God have special providence for Christians on earth? And I asked, Ben made a comment about the providence of God tonight, and I thought that was it. Special providence refers to God's extraordinary intervention in the life of people. Did God create the United States for Christianity? You guys can mull that over. Because the other question of that, does God administer divine retribution on earth? And divine retribution in Christianity encompasses the belief that God will administer justice in response to sinful actions, emphasizing personal accountability and the consequences of wrongdoing. And this is a sticky question, but it's one that's in their mindset. In their mindset, and I would dare say all of us have this to some extent, you sit there and think, if we've done something wrong, all right, and you see this, if my people pray, turn to the Lord, God will heal the land. What's wrong with us? We have a sickness in our country that we need to turn back to God so he will heal our land. That would be special providence. If we don't and we continue our immoral ways, God will judge us, all right, and we will have divine retribution. That's what these 2 concepts are. Their mindset was the same way, except for they took it to a whole different level. All right. So you're going to have this guy, and that's what. Well, we'll come to Leo in just a second. What is holy now? What is deserving of worship? All right. Some of their thoughts. The clergy is set apart as holy, so they should be worshipped. They should be considered that. The church buildings are dedicated, and they are holy. Monks, they sacrificed everything they lived. They are holy, all right? How about the martyrs' confessions? Martyrs and confessors, they have been persecuted or killed. They're holy. So you start to see this. Saints, Holy One, well, duh, it's in their name, holy, right? So saints are holy. Relics of saints. How about the bones of the apostles? How about holy people? How about images? Well, why not? Let's just call those holy too. How about the relics of holy objects, part of the cross, Jesus' robe? Anybody remember The Sound of Music? Kathy knows where I'm going to go with this. You remember the church building that they got married in The Sound of Music toward the end of the whole thing? And they're all there. This is that church building. It's called St. Michael's. It's in Vienna. And Kathy and I got to go see this place. And you'll remember the scene at the end, right? And here's the marriage scene. You can see the Von Trapp family over here on the right side of the screen. And here they are. They're going to walk down to get the marriage. I want you to pay attention to the altar back up there behind them. All right, that big golden thing up there behind that priest's head. So that's kind of what it looks like when you zero in on it, except there's not quite enough light in this picture. So let's do this. What do you see there? It is a skull. It's not a skull, it's a skeleton. That's St. Michael himself. Let's back out and look at the rest of this thing. See St. Michael up there? Yeah, here's his brothers down here too. I don't know what they are. These are relics. In that particular church, these are relics that they will pray in front of because they think that these people have died and they've gone to heaven, and you can pray through them to get to heaven. All right, you guys have problems with that? I know that I'm seeing some of the women, wrinkling their noses up going like, I don't think I can go to church. Now you're never going to think about Sound of Music the same again, are you? You're going to go back and watch it. And I said, I'm going to watch this thing. And you're going to pause it and try to find those back up there. And I guarantee you they're going to be there. I remember when Kathy and I walked down that aisle and I got up the front and my eyes got about this big going like, they got dead people in here. All right. I was doing this lesson. I came across this and there was a thing that had holy icons and relics for auction. And so over here on the left side, there's a whole bunch of stuff and these have lot numbers and you can bid on everything from the living, life-giving cross to the Holy Gospel and kind of go on and on. And there was some church, I guess, that was closing its doors and they put these up for auction, these holy icons. You can have one for your house. This thing on the right is a very ornate and elaborate, and the thing in the middle of the glass there contains a relic. And if I remember correctly, this was the hair of Mary, the mother of Jesus, that was contained in this reliquary. It's holy. That's where that goes. All right. Anybody got problems with that? If you go to an Orthodox church, this is the interior of one. I want you to look at all this stuff painted up here. Back here in the back, there is a thing that's called an I never can get this right, iconostasis. And that's where the golden little figures are there. They're figures outlined in gold. Those actually are areas that people come out of. And the first time I went to an Orthodox church and these guys popped out of one of those things, I had to jump because I thought, what in the world? But that means something, which door they come out, because they're coming out representing whoever is St. Nicholas or whoever is in that thing. And so they go in and out of that stuff, and it's full of these icons. Well, there was a guy that didn't like this, and he was an emperor, and he was an emperor in Constantinople, and we are almost out of time. His name was Conan the Isaurian. Could make a movie out of him, right? He wasn't a really good-looking guy. And I don't know about this, but I'm like, man, I would change my name too. So he changed his name to Emperor Leo. Well, he was the commander of the special forces, basically the strategic con. And in March 717, after 20 years of anarchy, he takes over as Emperor Leo III. And he's going to put things in. Abdul-Malik brought 80 to 150,000 soldiers, knocked at the doors of Constantinople. This is just March to August, so he hasn't been emperor very long. He's holed up and they prepare for siege, and they were under siege for a year. The Muslim fleet's destroyed by Greek fire. They go back and they talk about divine providence. Winning the siege was a sign from God that we're doing everything right. It was God's providence that we beat the Muslims. All right. And then something happens, divine retribution. A guy named Nicephorus records that Thera erupted. Now, if anybody has been to, I know Steve has, Santorini, that is the volcano of Thera that created Santorini. Now, I went back and tried to find it. It erupted way back in BC. So they had something else, but something erupted and it threw ash and rocks and boulders all over the Roman Empire. And Nicephorus says that's what it, but they interpret that as a warning sign from God. You're doing something wrong. And plus these Muslims haven't gone away. They just retreated back down to Persia for a while. So what are we doing wrong? I got the 10 Commandments right here. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Everybody on board with that? You kind of agree with that? We're probably all going to agree with that as Protestant people. So why can't we get along? So Leo issues a series of edicts against the worship of images, and it goes on for a while. Not everybody's on board. The Eastern poor people, non-Greeks, they were on board with this. They've got the Muslims knocking on the door, and the Muslims say, you don't worship images, because that's a violation of the 10 Commandments, by the way. The Muslims will point right back to that. So where'd you Christians get all wrong on that? The Eastern and the wealthy, and there's a big money around this. By the way, if you go to Athens today, you can go down one particular street and there are shops filled with all that golden stuff, and just like, wow, you could outfit a whole church with that. Anyway, they're not on board. The Western, they really didn't have an opinion until it became political. If it happened, it happened. If it didn't until it became political. And then it's kind of like, oh, we need to go on one side or the other to make political thing. If you were iconoclast, which meant destroyer of icons, The Bible, you would say the Bible condemns worshiping idols. The elements of the Lord's Supper were the true icon of Christ, the true image of Christ, identical substance with the flesh and blood of the divine and human Christ. And that's going to develop into something different. And then they went through and they said, we're replacing religious icons with truly holy symbols, the cross and the Bible. You guys, everybody in here would be an iconoclast probably in that camp. All right. If you were iconodual, that's a different word, which means that you believed in it. John of Damascus, who was considered one of the last church fathers, he would say an image was never the same substance as the original. In other words, if I take a picture of Jesse, that is not Jesse. It's not, Jesse's the original, and this picture is not the same substance as Jesse. All right? It's just an image of it. And the icon's only significance as is a copy and reminder of the original. All right? Why do we have photos of family all around our house? All right? It's to remind us of what our family looks like, I guess. All right? To deny that any true icon to depict Christ was to deny the possibility of the incarnation. In other words, the picture is not the incarnation. It's not Christ. It's not the divine. It is to remind you that the divine came to earth. That's the thinking behind that. So you see a picture of Jesus, you think of Jesus, whether not that that's Jesus, but that to remind you of Jesus. It was wrong to worship. They would say it's wrong to worship an icon. However, the presence of an icon could instruct and assist the believer in worship of the true Christ. All right, icons could be honored and venerated like the Bible or a cross, anything else like that. And so how did it play out? Pope Gregory condemned it. He's in Rome. Leo removes Sicily, southern Italy, the Western Balkans, Greece. They're no longer part of the Patriarchy of Rome. That's territory. So he's basically cutting his territory off, right? And Pope Gregory then says, well, I'm not getting help from these folks up in Constantinople. Who else can I talk to? Oh, there's old Charlie over there, King of the Franks. Let's go talk to him. We're going to talk more about him next week. In 754, there was an anti-icon synod, all right? 50,000 priests and monks left the Constantinople region, are going elsewhere. Leo IV, who is Leo III's son, he wasn't too energetic about the issue, all right? And he actually became emperor, but he's not going to enforce it too much. But his wife, Irene, is a story worth of a blockbuster movie. And I originally intended to come in and talk about Irene. And there's no, Angela's clapping my hands. There is no time to do it justice without taking a full class, and she's not worth that. But I'm going to put a link to these 4 episodes. Actually, there's 3 of them are free, and they're worth listening to these 3. These, I guarantee you, are entertaining. All right. And it's called the History of Byzantium podcast. Whatever you listen to, iTunes or whatever, you can go to their podcast, look up History of Byzantium. Episode 76. 77 is the one you have to buy, but 78 and 79 are the ones to buy. And you will get a picture of Irene that I guarantee you, it would be a blockbuster show. It's got every element that you can imagine to make it a powerful woman, intrigue, death. I mean, she kills her own son. Anyway, moving on. 787, the Second Council in Nicaea condemned the iconoclast movement, saying icons are okay. Emperor Leo reinstituted it. A synod of the church leaders reaffirmed the 754. It goes back and forth. We're playing ping pong. All right. And so basically this goes on. Eventually, Theophilus dies. He's a guy there. His wife, as regent, decides or abandon this. She did that basically so she can get support for her emperor son, who's an infant. And then 834, a synod condemned all iconoclasts, opposed the Patriarch of Constantinople, and confirmed a pro-icon synod of 787, ending this show. All right. The first Sunday of Lent, by the way, in the Orthodox calendar is called the Feast of Orthodoxy, and they celebrate the end of iconoclasm. We get to have images. That's orthodoxy. That's the end. Now you can pre-purchase your advance tickets for the Blockbuster sequel in the lobby because it's not over. All right. Wait till the Protestants wade in. All right. Questions or comments tonight? And I know we ran just a little bit over. Steve.
So I had an epiphany here as you were spreading all this out. I'm thinking to myself and thinking about today. Today in China, there's an underground church. And you must know, back then, there had to be an underground church. I can imagine everybody following some of this foolishness. Like, I'm sure we don't know about it, right? Or there are things that we know about, but we're not really discovering until you go to, who did you say? Is coming up? Who's the dude that's coming up?
Charlemagne? Luther? Martin Luther. Yeah.
So is that the birth?
Okay, so let me see if I can read it. So Steve's saying, well, what happens with, I'll say, sincere Christianity
Yeah, like
under this
simplistic.
Orthodox religion? So the first thing I would say is it's not like what you think of church. Could you worship God and be a sincere Christian in this time? And I would venture to say that a lot of people are very pious Roman Catholic Christians. I'm not the one making the judgment about their salvation. All right, neither are you. And they're not the ones making the judgment about my salvation. There's only one person, all right, making the judgment about salvation. His name is Jesus Christ. He will judge the quick and the dead, and that's it. So, and while the institutional church and people in the institutional church get really whacked out, can Christianity survive during that? Well, it has. And there were periods of reformation, but there are also going to be periods. There are some people that write during this time. I'm going to sit down again. But there are people that write during this Middle Age time period that are profound. That would, St. John of the Cross is one that is just Francis of Assisi. You look at him and what he did, and it's just amazing at some of the things like that. So while they have the bad actors, and the bad actors basically are up top controlling a lot of stuff, I think there's still Christianity carries on. I think people.
Francis had one of my favorite sayings.
Yeah.
Preach the gospel every day, and if necessary, use words.
Yeah.
I love that. And that kind of spirit. Of course, your comment about all this things going on, the insanity of all this, human beings. I mean, who would have ever thought that a German dictator could convince an entire country to wipe out a group of people?
Yeah.
And there's something about our brains following leaders and just trusting leaders, and just that you have to say, we still have to be diligent in believing and standing for truth and for what's right. And I think that's what I'm always fascinated at how we ended up with today's church. When you go through and you look at this and how we ended up with anything that's a semblance of what you would hope the kingdom of God would be. I mean, I guess that's not a world I even want to dive into. I mean, have church like that and life like that and being harsh, and I don't want any part of that.
Yeah. Jesse, was there any online comments or questions? No.
Jeremy saying that you had a very nice horse.
I have a nice horse.
Very nice horse.
The background that you use on this slide.
One of your slides, your picture is right over the person that's riding the horse, and so it looks like.
All right. Well, yeah. So coming up next in 2 weeks, we're not meeting next week for the national holiday. Anyway, So we'll talk about the late, early, and high Middle Ages, if you want to put that period, or the Middle Ages, middle of the Middle Ages, 1800 to 1300. So we'll kind of hit some things that happened during that time period and some of the theological things that came about that. And it's, as I said at the very start, and I told Ben in this, I said, the thing is so tough about teaching this time period, there's not a lot of good stuff you can point out. It's just like, how we went from this ideal to this freedom in Christianity to ruling, and then mankind mess it up. And then we're coming out on the end of what we have today, and there's still a lot of things today that I think, we still mess up. So God's grace saves us. All right. Well, that's all for tonight. Thanks.
I didn't see you snore. You did.
Did that-
Well,